Tonight we will examine concepts that may challenge your perception of the world around you. Strange creatures, chilling tales, and the occasional conspiracy. Here on our show, we will attempt to provide you with paranormal insight. Last time on part 1 with Erick Szilagyi.
So at 5 years old, I was obsessed with UFOs. Move forward, a few years. I'm getting into Bigfoot. I'm getting into Loch Ness Monster. The Bermuda Triangle at that time was a pretty big thing. Anything that was like out of the norm really just appealed to me. I loved watching scary movies, whether it was the old Hammer films or the old Universal Studios. I can remember sitting behind a chair in my mom and dad's living room watching Christopher Lee as Dracula. And I filled my days with this stuff. At about that 8 or 9 year old age, I can remember laying in bed. I used to have to sleep with the hallway light on. I rolled over and I opened my eyes and I looked at the doorway and I saw a shadow standing there. There were only 3 people living in the house. It was my mom, my dad, and myself. And this silhouette that I was looking at was neither of them. And, I never said anything about it. I never told my parents about it. Probably in the age of around 18, I was dating a girl. She had gone down to Southern Indiana to IU University. Back in those days in the 80s, it was a big thing to do mixtapes, right? So I had made a tape and I'd sent it down to her. I sent her some of her favorite candy bars. And I think I called her like once a week. I got the package back and there was a note in there that was like, this was horrible. Why would you do this to me? I had no idea what the hell was going on. So I called her and she wouldn't take my phone call. I called her back like 3 times. And finally, one of her friends from the dorm, she gets on the phone and she goes, I don't know what your problem is, but that wasn't funny. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she said, listen to the tape like you don't know. And she hung up. So I went back to the house and I listened to the tape. Then I flipped it over and all of a sudden, as the tape starts to play, I start hearing this. It just went on and on. There wasn't like any breath. It took up like 10 minutes of the tape. Then it left and it went right into whatever the rest of the songs were that I put on. I was freaked out. I called my buddy and I said, man, I need you to come over. So he comes over and I rewound the tape and I played it for him. He's like, you got to tell your dad. So we took it up to my dad and we played it for him. And here's the really weird thing is that his reaction was not what you would have expected. He listened to maybe a minute of it, maybe. And he hit the eject and he pulled the tape out and he handed it to me. He goes, take this out to the end of the driveway and burn it. So we took it out to the end of the driveway where the curb is and I set it on fire. And as I stepped back from the burning tape, in the flames, I saw a blue upside down cross.
And now the continuation of Erick's story. My first blush instinct on that was, I was like, oh, did the tape get caught and it just recorded slow and then it picked up?
That's what initially that's what I thought. I thought the tape was getting eaten, but it wasn't because it was.
Did you look at it?
I opened it up and I looked at it because I was no stranger to, I had, when I got my first car, the first thing I did was save up money to get a Pioneer head deck put in there, so I had a tape deck in there and,
nice.
I was no stranger to having to take a pencil and stick it in the hole of the tape.
Yeah.
And, rewind it. So that initially that's what I thought was going on. It didn't really sound like that.
Okay. And if the tape wasn't disrupted or crinkled or anything,
right. Yeah.
Okay, then.
So, the evidence is gone. So, it melted at the end of the driveway.
And a blue flame.
In a blue flame with a upside down blue cross.
Wow, gosh.
So,
all right.
But, and that's those experiences are, what had continued to fuel my interest in this stuff. And well, it was in May during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I had been a coach at a high school for high school football. I met a buddy of mine. We'd known each other for about 10 years. We were coaches at varying different levels together. And he also did a side gig where he would broadcast high school sports on an online radio so that people who couldn't make the games could actually tune in and listen to the games being broadcast.
Right.
It was a nice little gig for him. And so I went over there mid-May during the pandemic. Everything in Michigan is shut down. You can't go to restaurants. You can't do this. You can't do that. Right. Social distancing, all this stuff. And I went over to his garage and we sat out in the garage and had a couple of beers. And I said, hey, you ever think about doing a podcast? And he looked at me and he goes, are you crazy? He's like, and I said, well, you've got the equipment. We could do it. Whenever we get together, we're never short of anything to talk about. Whether anybody wants to hear it or not is debatable. But, so we decided to start doing this little Beyond Sports with Biggie and Bob. And it basically was just a very local for the community that we were both a part of, because our kids had gone to school there and, we coach there. And so it was all basically about this small local community. And, we had some shows that weren't worth a shit. And then we had some shows that really, really did really well for us, especially when we had the school administration. We had 6 of the school administrators on. We talked about, what the new pandemic landscape looked for as far as kids getting back to school and stuff like that. And we had over 500 listens on that episode, and, so we had our share of successes and some that were, not so great. But he was a busy guy. So we ended up, there were a couple of weeks where he couldn't make it. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to slide in some of the stuff that I like to talk about. And I did one episode on a paranormal team that's kind of local to us. Then I did one about a Bigfoot group that I had found in the state of Michigan that was willing to talk to us. And, they were good. They were good shows. We didn't get a lot of listens because of it just going out to the small community.
Right.
But I went back and I listened to them and I was like, it was pretty good. It was
Gotcha.
Pretty good. And it started to become apparent that, my desire to talk about this weird stuff really wasn't jibing with talking about sports and in our local community. So I was, I felt like I had tried to fit a round peg into a square hole,
right.
Or a square peg into a round hole. I decided to start. I didn't really tell him about it right off the bat, because at times he can be a little bit of a naysayer. Mm-hmm. Not that he's trying to just, get you not to do something, but he is like, man, that's stupid. Nobody's going to want to listen to that.
Little does he know.
So, I started putting a couple of shows together, and then I got to episode 5, and episode 5 kind of rocked my world a little bit, because I ended up having the interview with a Native American witch. And, was that something you wanted me to get into, or do you want me to direct people to go listen to that episode?
Oh, I invite people to go listen to that episode. Absolutely. But it was, I think as far as being on the air, I invite you to talk about stuff off the air too. Sure. If you want to go into that, you may, but, it was the whoop that kind of touched things off. Let's remind our audience what we're talking about. Here's the sound.
Yeah, you live your life. And
what was that?
That's not your only on-air experience.
No. That night with the witch, I witnessed an arm reach through a door and wave at her. It was not completely apparent to me at the time that when I saw that, the door did not open. So for that arm to come through that door, that was not a physical arm. And, basically it just reached into the room and waved at her. She seemed oblivious to it. At the time, I thought, in my head, I was thinking that it was her brother, just kind of like, hey, I'm here. I'm not going to bother you. But the door didn't open. It was shut.
The arm came through the door, correct?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because the door was directly beside my left shoulder and the doorknob was right there. So had it opened, I certainly would have seen the door swinging open and somebody standing there. So that, and then, about maybe halfway through it, we talked about a lot of different things, man. And one of them was that she has a group of Bigfoot on the property that surrounds her where she lived. And we're recording and she was like in the middle of a sentence and she was pronouncing the word and, to continue her sentence. And all of a sudden, man, we were just hit with this bombastic, just ungodly loud, shocking, piercing noise. And, I ripped my cans off my head, and she and I both, like, the back wall to her bedroom was all windows. So she spun around to look at the windows. I was looking at the windows. I had chill bumps on top of chill bumps on top of chill bumps. And she looked back at me and she goes, "Did you hear that?" And I was like, "Yeah, what the hell was that?"
Yeah, it's on the audio.
Now the really interesting thing though is, like, you can hear it, right?
You can hear it. Absolutely.
Some people can't hear it.
That's bizarre.
Some people can't hear it.
I mean, I had to turn it up a little bit, but you could definitely hear it go whoop in the background.
Yeah. Some people can't hear it for nothing. And the really weird thing is like, I isolated that audio and I had like a 10-second, 12-second clip that I put on my cell phone, my Apple phone, my iPhone, and I would play it for people. Sometimes I could hear it clear as a bell. Sometimes I'm like, I can't hear it. And I went over to a friend of mine's house and I handed it to her and she pushed play. She was sitting like on the other side of the room and she was pushing play to play it for her mom. And from, 10 feet away, I could hear it like nobody's business. Yeah. But to hold the phone up to my, and to listen to it, you can hardly hear it.
Right. I had to listen to it on earphones and then I could really hear it.
Such a strange, why certain times you can hear it, why certain times it's louder, why certain times it's not. It just really strange.
We actually studied this at NASA. Well, I worked at NASA for 2 years, and there's something called harmonic resonance, and it'll actually, if you look at the waveform of a given sound, there are certain frequencies where it just doesn't show up, and if you isolate that frequency and you play it back, you won't hear anything.
Really?
Yeah. If you play in the dips or isolate the dips of this given sound wave, you won't hear it at all. So you're dealing with something that created infrasound.
Yeah.
So that's why you got the chill bumps, because you heard it on multiple levels. The human ear is more sensitive than most people understand.
Well, the thing that you'll notice is, I've explained to you my equipment, and it's high dollar stuff. It's good, very good sounding equipment. I got high quality mics and the whole bit. So the representation of what I had heard in that room versus what you hear on that recorded audio, night and day difference.
Oh, I bet.
It shook me. My body went into arguably fight or flight. First thing that went through my mind was, shit, I left my gun in the car. Second thought that followed it immediately was, shit, I got 40 pounds of dog food in the backseat of my car, which was really a weird a weird thing.
They're going to break into my trunk and eat the dog's food.
But what was going through my mind was, having read stories and heard reports of people who keep their feed for their animals in a trash can with a lid, and they come and they eat it.
Yep.
So, during the course of this, I had the chill bumps, right?
Right.
And then it kind of started to dissipate. But then it came back. It was like a wave, and it came back, but it wasn't as strong. And then it would dissipate, and then it'd come back again, but it wasn't quite as strong again. Mm-hmm. And then it would dissipate, and it did it like 4 or 5 times.
With no subsequent sound after?
Right. Correct.
Okay.
Just still just dealing with that one sound.
Okay. Gotcha.
And it wasn't for a couple of days until it struck me, because having looked into Bigfoot and, gone down the rabbit holes rather than just watching Finding Bigfoot or stuff like that.
Right. Actually,
getting into people's reports and some of what people consider to be the woo aspects of these things.
Right.
It finally dawned on me. It's like, it felt like it was an electrical thing. And then I was like, oh, that's what people mean when they say they got zapped.
Right. Right.
And I was like, holy shit, and I was a little disappointed in myself that it took me, 3 or 4 days to come up with that. But it was a very real realization that it's like, okay, so my body reacted to an infrasonic sub frequency.
Right. Exactly right.
I didn't hear something that was that loud. My body was hit by sound waves at a sub-level frequency.
Right. Lions and tigers do that.
And elephants.
Exactly.
And whales.
And whales, yes.
A whale, from what I've read, if a person was to be around a whale and the whale was to use the infrasound that they have at their disposal, they could basically liquefy the internal organs of a human being with it.
In a heartbeat, yeah. It would be pretty messy.
And there's even a story, I believe it was in Africa, where elephants had not been for quite some time, and they had moved back into the area, and this community that lived there, they saw a sudden increase in suicides. And nobody could figure it out.
Right.
And then once they realized that the herd of elephants that was so very close to this community, the amount of infrasound that they were producing by that herd were affecting people in a negative way, and they were committing suicide.
If I remember, I think I know that report too. And if I remember, it was the science teams, they actually compared to the Taos hum. If you know about that at all.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just driving them nuts.
Yeah. So, just very weird stuff, and, there were some other things that happened later that night. She basically, she was sitting on the corner of her bed as we were finished with the interview, and I was packing my stuff up, and I looked at her and I saw this, and the only thing I can really equate it to is I keep bringing up, an Etch-a-Sketch, because if you look at an old Etch-a-Sketch, you kind of have that sparkly sand that's underneath the glass.
Yeah.
That when you do the knobs, it drags that little cursor and draws the line. I saw like this, and it wasn't bright. It wasn't really, overt. It was just like this sparkly, very, very transparent shimmer that kind of came across her. And as it did, her clothes went away. The lines in her face smoothed out. Her hair straightened out and got longer. And I wound up sitting there looking at what would have been maybe a 18 to 20-year-old version of her.
Crazy.
Bare ass naked.
Good times.
Sitting in front of me. And then just like that, I lost my words, man.
Yeah, I bet.
I had no words.
Right.
And then just like that shimmer came back again, and she's back to being 46 years old. Hair was a little curlier and a little shorter. She was wearing a car length leather coat, blue jeans, shirt, the whole, back to being who I'd been sitting with for 2 hours. And she kind of leaned towards me. She had a smile on her face and she goes, "What's the matter, hon? What did you see?" And I said, "I didn't say I saw anything." And she goes, "Oh." And she sat back up, and then we walked outside, and I was freaked out. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I was freaked out. That was some shit that should not have been,
Right.
that should not have happened.
I think in magic terms, that's called a glamour.
That's what I've been told.
Yeah.
That's what I've been told. And so we walked outside. I loaded my stuff into the car, put it next to the 40 pounds of dog food. She walked up to the front of the hood of my car. She faced the back of her property. She put her hands up around her face and she went, "Whoop." And now all the property around her house was wooded. There was a little bit of a ravine in the backyard. There was a pretty good sized stream. I wouldn't say it was a river, but a pretty good sized stream that ran back there.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that from when I first got there in the daylight. And moments after she did that, from back behind the house in that ravine, you get a whoop. And then like a few seconds after that, way off to the right, you hear another one that sounds like it was at least twice as far away. You hear whoop.
Wow.
And she turned back and she looked at me and she smiled and she goes, "Isn't that neat? Isn't that cool?" And I was like, "I don't know. I don't know if that's cool or not."
Right. Wow.
And she said she would leave food out on the back deck for them.
Okay.
And there was a place that she would go sit. That was not too far. She actually showed me where that area was. She would go back and she would sit there and she would sing to them in her native Algonquin language.
Nice.
And she would leave, peanut butter jars or, candies or honey buns or stuff like that unwrapped and just leave them sitting out there and they'd be gone. I got in my car and I started driving home, and the road that she lived on was pretty twisty and turny and a lot of S curves and everything. Again, it was very wooded in that area. And if it wasn't wooded, it was farmland.
Mm.
And, it was dark out. It was 9:30, 9:45 at night. And man, I could not bring myself to turn my bright lights on. I could not.
You did not want to see, right?
I did not want to see any eye shine coming out of those freaking woods as I was going through those corners.
Tracking you the whole time. Oh man, that would be frightening.
Did not want it. I did not want it.
Yeah.
So
man,
that was a bizarre night. That was 3 hours of my life that was like, holy cow.
Welcome to the paranormal.
Yeah.
Oh man.
And then, out of the clear blue, before we had actually left the house, she says, "Oh, hey, I got somebody I think would be a great fit for your show, a friend of mine." And I said, "Really?" And she goes, "Yeah, his name's Erick too." And I said, "Erick Bernor?" And she said, "Yeah. Oh my God. How did you know?" And I'm like, "I didn't. How did you know?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" And I said, I've been trying to get in touch with Erick Bernor for like 2.5 months.
Huh.
My very first interview was with a demonologist out of Kalamazoo, Michigan. His friend was an author named Corvus Nocturnum.
Corvus Nocturnum.
His real name is Erick Bernor. And Erick Bernor is a reverend in the Church of Satan in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And how she pulled that name out of how many billion people in the world?
All right.
And I was floored. And she's like, "Oh yeah, he's a good friend of mine." She says, "I'll send him a message. He'll get back with you. He'd be a great interview." 3 days later, I get a message on Facebook from him. "Hey, I'm sorry. I heard Susan said you were trying to get a hold of me. I'd be happy to be on your show."
Huh. You're a braver man than me.
So, you know, and what could be more uncomfortable than,
Right.
you know, a Catholic raised guy talking to a reverend in the Church of Satan, right?
Right, exactly.
Um,
Well, you're living
you
up to
know,
your brand. I'll give you that.
very nice guy, very kind. Seemed like a very astute businessman. Um, you know, he seemed to be very accommodating as far as answering all the questions that I had. Do I believe the answers that he gave me were truthful? Especially when I asked him, you know, why would I accept what you're saying as the truth when Satan is, you know, the great deceiver?
Right.
You know, would you be honest with me, or would you naturally not be honest with me? You know, and
Right.
so you know, it made for a great conversation. It was really interesting. He was very cordial, and you know, I'd sit down and talk to him again, but I'm probably not going to. So, um, you know, so I've had, you know, these weird tendrils that kind of come out of one episode and they may not go into the next episode, but you know, 2 or 3 down the road, they show up again. And there's these weird continuities that continue to happen. And, you know, throughout the course of doing this show, you know, like I said, I'm into 103, 104 episodes. And just to see the weird web that that comes out of doing this.
Right. Good way to put it.
It's just a strange web of weirdness, you know, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Agreed.
Just the continuity and the I use the word and I hate it, but the synchronicities that happen, and
yeah,
it's just bizarre. And I mean, I love it. It's great. I'm extremely thankful that I've been able to surround myself with some very positive people, some people that seem to have a good relationship with the light. I think that keeps me grounded, and I think that keeps me from crossing over into entertaining thoughts of, you know, digging into this stuff for the wrong reasons, I guess.
I understand completely. Yeah. I'm fortunate to have those people in my life as well.
Yeah. And, you know, have I always been a believer in psychics and stuff like that? You know, of all the things that I have believed in, I've often thought of the psychic side of things as being kind of iffy. Yeah. I am no longer in that boat. I am a flag waving supporter of people with legitimate gifts. You know, they are out there, and when you find the right one, man, they can make a difference.
They sure can. Oh yeah, I know that from personal experience. Absolutely, with JJ.
Absolutely.
I just had her on. We recounted her first case with us, and be sure to stay tuned for that. That's coming up soon. Actually, it'll probably air before this episode, but it'll.
Oh, I see how you are.
We'll see. I can move things around. I don't care.
Oh, she'd kill you.
Oh, she'd do bad things to me. Okay, so of these experiences, can you find one or two that made you go, my God, that's the coolest thing ever, versus I will never do that again?
Well, I don't know that I have any that I would say I would never do again.
Interesting. Okay.
That's a tough one. I mean, okay. There's some things that I think I would probably put in place before I did them again, that I was not aware of when I did them before.
Gotcha.
You know, I look at the amount of experiences that I've had in my life, and then the experiences that I've had since I've started doing this show. And I am extremely fortunate that I have not suffered the fool for doing it.
Yeah.
I think it's because I have a very strong And this is how JJ and I kind of came into our friendship. I wanted to do an episode on spiritual armament and fortification, because I've always felt that I've got a very strong fortification. I can't recite anything out of the Bible. I'm not this. I don't carry that with me.
Right.
But what I do carry in my heart is, that love and light and the desire to be good and do good.
The Seekers of California for Ethereal Research and Investigation. We investigate hauntings, cryptids, UFOs, and offer cleansing and clearing. Don't get scared, call Scary. Serving the greater San Jose area and beyond. Call us at 408-320-8467. That's 408-320-8467. Scary Paranormal Investigations.
I think I'm very fortunate that I've come very close to things that could have affected me. And they haven't.
Yeah.
I haven't had any lasting effects of anything like that. And I don't know if they look at me and be like, nah, he's not worth the effort, or, I don't know what it is. I don't get the feeling that I'm pushing my luck ever. I don't get the feeling that man, one of these days it's going to get me.
Right.
I don't ever really feel that way, and maybe I should, but I don't.
Well, I don't know if you're out doing investigations like me.
I've done a few.
Okay.
I've done a few, and the only reason I've done a few is because each time I have gone, I have again had such overwhelming confirmation. I have not been that person that had to struggle with going to multiple different investigations before I ever got an EVP or I got a picture or anything. I've always been, wow, that was easy. That was easy. And I don't, I look back at that and I wonder if there's something indicative of myself that is allowing that to happen. I don't know if, I'm not, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I have gifts. I'm not saying that I attract the paranormal. I don't know what it is, but all I know is that if I put myself in a position like that, I can get recordable confirmation, whether it be picture, whether it be audio EVP, whether it be a spirit box, whether it be K2 meters. I've never, and so that, that chase, that hunt for me is not a very strong need or desire, because I've, like I said, with the stuff that I had happen with my dad, and I don't need anything to be proved to me. Sure, I would like to know how it's possible, why it's possible, what the mechanics of their interaction with us is. That would all be great and interesting to find out. But I don't need anything I don't have to prove myself. I don't have to prove it to myself, because I'm already there.
Right.
I'm like,
so. Yeah, no, same. I mean, I said it before, you and I are living virtually parallel lives as far as this stuff goes. It's amazing, because my first case, and I just did a podcast about our first case with Scary, and how we chased a legend. Not a confirmed report, but we had reports of hauntings that came out of this one area, but there was and it was based on a suicide that happened at this location, but there was no police reports surrounding it. There was nothing to back it up on paper. Yeah. So we investigated a legend and we got a response. Wow. That was pretty intense.
How cool. Is that episode out?
It will be in 2 weeks.
All right. I have to check that out.
Yeah. I just put part 1 up yesterday. So of my two-parter with JJ. So be sure to listen to that. Let's talk briefly about Bigfoot. Your show revolves a lot around Bigfoot, not exclusively, but
Right.
quite a bit. I'm sure you've seen the shows where there's a couple of them, if maybe one or two, I don't know, but they're actually looking to shoot down a Bigfoot for confirmation. Where do you stand on that?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
You know, you've got so many sides to the Bigfoot thing. You've got the people who are apers, and then you have the people who are, you know, these things are more of a person,
Right?
People,
Right.
You know,
apers. I love that term.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know, and the apers seem to attract the academics.
Yeah.
The people that, you know, have, you know, like Jeff Meldrum and Cliff Barrickman and stuff like that. They tend to be on the aper side, because they have this crutch of science that they like to lean on. And I don't begrudge them that. It's much easier to talk about these things from the standpoint, and we need everything we can get as far as people, you know, confirming that these things exist, you know, like Meldrum with the foot casts and, you know, determining the foot morphology and the, you know, the weird break in their foot, that allows, and, you know, and when you break it down and you look at it structurally, that's what would have to be, and that would have to be the design of a foot that was carrying an excessive amount of weight, and an excessive amount of height, the mid-tarsal break. Right. So we need all that stuff. But the thing that annoys me is when those people discount the people who have experiences that are considered like on the woo side of things, you know, the infrasound and, you know, lights in the woods, either before or after seeing one, you know, these weird things. You know, I talked to Christina Rake, the Archbishop of the Old Catholic Church, you know, and she's a paranormal investigator as well. And in the episode I was doing with her, we talked about, you know, isn't it strange how so many things throughout, you know, UFO abductions, extraterrestrial interactions, haunted houses, you know, poltergeist activity, Bigfoot stuff, you know, light orbs. I literally saw a light orb manifest in front of me. Wow. My daughter was with me. We both saw it happen right in front of our face. It was not a reflection of light on a piece of dust. It was not the shiny shit that's on the wings of a moth. It was not through any kind of night vision or, you know, like a ring camera where, you know, infrared light's being projected at something that it reflects off of. And because of the film speed, that it looks like a flying rod or anything like that. This was a manifestation of light about the size of a golf ball, maybe a little bit smaller.
Wow.
And it happened in a graveyard. It happened right at the top of a monument. It appeared, it zipped around real quick, and then boom, it was gone. I couldn't follow it as it left. It just dissipated and was gone.
Wow.
You know, so I know what a true orb looks like. Well, people that have experiences with Bigfoot say they see lights in the woods, right? Could they be fireflies? Yeah. Could they be, you know, gas, swamp gas? Yeah, I suppose.
You know how rare that phenomenon is.
But, you know, then you start talking to people who do paranormal investigations and they see orbs. And I'm not talking about dust in your camera lens.
Right.
I'm talking about an orb that is producing its own light source.
Yeah.
And then, you know, people also see balls of light dancing around in the sky, you know, and, you know, people very often, one of the reports as far as Bigfoot are concerned is you hear tree knocks.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Tree
knocks,
awesome.
You know, well, the weird thing about tree knocks is when you hear a tree knock, if you go pick up a limb and try to create a tree knock yourself, it sounds nothing like what you're hearing. Yeah. The only way you can get even close is if you take like two old-fashioned hardwood baseball bats and clonk them together.
Right.
So it's a very distinctive sound. It's very difficult to recreate.
It's almost like you have to use an axe handle just to kind of even begin to replicate that sound.
But then you have to find the right tree.
It has to be a really narrow tree to get it too.
You know,
yeah, right.
But then, you know, how many times do you hear about a paranormal group being in a house and hearing knocks?
Right. Yeah.
You know,
good point.
And it's like, so many of these things, kind of weave in and out of Bigfoot experiences and paranormal experiences.
Mhm.
You know, you hear people talk about Bigfoot using mind speak.
Oh yeah.
Almost every account of anybody that's ever claimed to have a extraterrestrial encounter,
Yeah.
they talk through their mind.
Right.
You know,
Mhm.
and you know when you're getting interaction from a ghost or a spirit in a haunted location, they're physically not there. You're getting an electronic voice phenomenon that is being produced from where.
Right.
You know, it doesn't make sense. You know, we have the crude science to be able to capture it, but nobody can explain how it's happening or why it's happening.
There was actually a short paper done, I forget how many years ago, that they actually theorized that spirits, ghosts, whatever it is you want to call them, when they produce sound, they're actually using hard light. Is it with a hard light emission to create vocal
Really?
cords and all that stuff? And they're actually manifesting like a hard light somehow. It's not in the human visual spectrum. Obviously, that's why they're invisible.
Well, and that's an interesting part that you bring up. You know, the visual spectrum.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about frequencies, vibrations,
Of light.
and
Yeah.
you know what we as human are capable of hearing and seeing. We can only see in a very narrow spectrum of light.
Yeah.
And we can only hear in a very narrow spectrum of sound.
That's true.
And then, you know, we have people that talk about these Bigfoot being able to cloak, which sounds absolutely crazy.
That's my absolute. But there was a federal study on that. Did you know that?
No.
There was I think it was a military study. I forget who reported this. This was also some years ago, where they actually put bunkers in the forest, and they were eye level with the floor. And they'd have soldiers or scientists or someone down there watching these things, seeing, one, if they showed up, and two, if they did the cloaking thing so they can study it. That's unconfirmed, but nonetheless, I believe it.
Well, I've talked to a woman, and I hope like hell I can get her on the show. She had an experience where she was in the presence of a Sasquatch. She had not seen it, but she was recognizing. She had seen one before, and she was recognizing the same physical cues or the way she was feeling about being in the presence of them. She started to usher her child. They were hunting a piece of property together. She got her son out of the tree stand, and they were exiting the area. And she looked back. And when she looked back, and this was a piece of property that they had hunted for a long time, she was very comfortable there. She knew the place inside and out. And when she looked back, what she saw was still trees, and it was still air, blue skies, and it was still, leaves and grass and everything. But it did not look like it was supposed to look. And when we start talking about like Ron Moorhead in his book, the quantum Bigfoot, he starts getting into the quantum entanglement and a lot of stuff about Bigfoot. And this leads me to believe that, through like the Sierra Sounds, the gentleman that broke down the Sierra Sounds for Ron, he was a retired Navy cryptolinguist,
Right.
Scott Nelson. He was able to determine there was a morphology there. He could isolate, termination points of sentences, exclamations. There were several beasts that were talking over each other and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the noises that they can make and the stuff, some people have suggested the possibility of having multiple sets of vocal cords.
Or they're big creatures, so they probably have a higher and lower range than we do. That's for sure.
It starts to make me think that it seems pretty unlikely to me that they would be able to cloak themselves. That seems pretty Hollywood. But, but what if they have enough of enough grasp of frequency where they can alter the frequency that distorts your vision?
That could well be.
Because when she looked back and saw that her environment had changed and did not look the way it should have looked, that's what started making me think maybe they're able, with the low infrasonic frequencies that they can produce, allegedly, maybe they can produce other frequencies that can disrupt our visual acuity. And maybe that's why people are saying, oh, they cloak themselves. Well, no, they're not cloaking themselves. Maybe they're just changing what you're seeing.
Yeah, that could well be. But so she looks back and she sees kind of this predator thing happening where it's
No, she doesn't see any physical creature or anything. What she sees is that the trees look different, the sky looks different, the ground looks different. It still looks like it, but it doesn't look like the place that she's supposed to be at.
Oh.
It looks.
Okay.
So what I'm getting at is maybe their use of frequency and vibration is enough, if they direct it like a directed sound weapon,
Sure,
that it can affect how you're viewing what's in front of you. And maybe that's what people are saying. They're cloaked. Maybe they're not cloaked. Maybe they're just adjusting the frequency around you, and it's affecting your visual interpretation of what you're seeing.
Yeah, there's a pretty close relation. I heard a noise.
Sorry, my wrist hit my watch.
Oh, I see. There's a pretty close relation between sound and the visual spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
You can affect it. So I mean, they knew this in ancient India with the mandalas and everything.
Right. Well, and interestingly enough, this is something, and I wish to God I could find it. I talk about it all the time. I don't remember if it was in a documentary, if it was just a segment on a show, but there were two gentlemen. They were at Stonehenge. They were both some type of sound engineers. They had gone into Stonehenge with permission. They had a bunch of big speakers. They had a soundboard. They had all kinds of stuff set up, and they were bouncing frequencies from high frequencies to low frequencies. They were bouncing these frequencies off the inside walls of the stones at Stonehenge.
Okay.
And what they were trying to figure out was maybe the intended purpose of that was, if there was some kind of, back in the day when it was being used by the people who created it, like rhythmic drumming or some kind of, monks all standing around doing some kind of rhythmic humming or something like that. Was that some sort of a resonance chamber? Was it designed to induce some kind of an out of body experience, or, was it designed to kind of put somebody into a trance-like state? So they were going through all these different frequencies and stuff. And as they started getting down into the sub frequencies, into the infrasonic level, and they were pumping out some massive volume. I mean, the equipment they had was really impressive. The one guy had to pull out. He couldn't do it anymore because his vision was getting affected. He was feeling ill. He wasn't feeling good. He was shaky. So they had to stop the experiment. Well, when you look at the Havana syndrome, that's a sound directed weapon at the U.S. embassy in, what was it, Cuba,
right?
And all these people, all of the effects that they're reporting are the same things that people report when they're having an experience with a Bigfoot that directs infrasound at them.
Yep.
And distorted vision or eye problems are one of those things that are listed as an issue.
As I said, those two things are very closely related. A lot of people don't realize that. So, okay. But last thing before we go,
all right.
I wanted to give you kudos on episode 60. It was your editorial on the Hopkinsville Goblin case.
Oh, did you like that?
I dug that a lot. I love that case. That's just an amazing case. And the fact that Dr. Heineck backpedaled on everything he wrote down in a blue book and said, yep, that really happened.
It's a shame because, it's been ridiculed so much, and there's been so many things, that I forget what his name was, but, he was a carny and he worked, I get it. But I think I even indicated at the beginning of that episode, and I don't very often do just a one-off episode like that where I don't have an interview and I tell a story. It's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work as well. You know,
I appreciate your soundtrack. Yeah, I was just going to say, I really appreciated that.
But, you know, it's just one of those stories that grabbed me as a youth.
Yeah.
And I've never been able to shake it. It's never gone away from me.
Yeah, it really sticks with you, and it makes you think about the other alien attacks that have happened, that have been reported. And whether that was an intended attack or not, or just a really intense scrutiny of those people, I couldn't say. But, you know, that one always stuck with me as well. And when I saw that on your list, I listened to it just before we got on the air.
Did you really?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun, you know. And I did another episode on the Dewey Lake Monster from 1964 in Dowagiac, Michigan. I did that one similar way with some sound effects and stuff, and it's just me talking. Again, they're a lot of fun, but they're a lot of work to put something together like that as well. You know, I've seen people talk about similar things on YouTube, and they don't put a lot into it. They just tell the story, and I don't think it conveys well unless you really put some effort behind, you know, the oral part of, you know, hearing it going on as you're talking about it.
A little bit of theater to the mind, it just assisted a little bit. That's awesome.
Yeah. And it kind of reminded me of like old time radio.
The old radio shows. Yeah.
Yeah. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to give you kudos on that. I enjoyed your perspective on that, and I enjoyed you retelling that story. That was a lot of fun.
Well, you know, there's a lot of things at the end of the day. There's a lot of things that point back to, you know, the guy who was the main impetus behind debunking the whole thing.
Yep.
Then turns around and sends somebody who he's now working with on the other side of it to revisit it, because there was enough stuff there that indicated that it really was something that happened.
Right.
I think that speaks volumes about that story. And a lot of people don't realize that portion of the story, that they went back afterwards.
Yeah.
And, you know, basically had to recant everything that Hynek had said in Project Blue Book about that situation.
Exactly. I mean, that alone is just telling. Yeah. So telling of what actually happened there. Just amazing stuff. All right. So, Eric, I know you have to go, but I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being on the show tonight.
Man, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on, Tim.
No problem. Do you have anything you want to pitch before we take off?
You know, if anybody's interested in hearing my show, it's Uncomfortable Podcast. I'm available on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcast, Overcast, Undercast, Castover. You know, every large podcast distributor that's out there. You can find me on their apps. There's a few shows out there called Uncomfortable. So if you just look up Uncomfortable Erick, I'll pop right up. It's a black and white logo with a lowercase U and an uppercase N.
Yeah.
And
I was surprised to find that, actually.
Yeah.
All those Uncomfortable shows. Well,
there's one about finances. I think there's one that's a Christian church.
Right.
There's a bunch of different stuff, but I really liked the name for the show.
Sure.
And I think it's pretty fitting, you know. Originally I thought, well, you know, some of these things people are going to be uncomfortable to talk about it. Some people are going to be uncomfortable to hear about it.
Right.
And, you know, during episode 5 with the dinner with the witch, I had no idea that it would end up making me uncomfortable, but it certainly did. So I'm happy with the name. If your people are interested in hearing some good accounts, some good eyewitness stuff and stories, please head over, check us out. And Tim, I can't thank you enough for having me on, and it's been a pleasure.
Been a pleasure for me too.
I want all the best for you, man.
Thanks.
I hope this takes off for you, and it's just a wild ride.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to a wild ride. I could use one right about now. Be careful what I wish for, I know. But so, ladies and gentlemen, once again, visit Uncomfortable, the podcast, if you want to hear more wonderful stories and interviews by Erick. Erick, thank you so much for being on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tim Sedano, and this is Paranormal Insight. Thank you for watching and listening. Please click the subscribe button and activate notifications for future episodes and other content. On Spotify, please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. If you have a paranormal experience that you would like to discuss on the show, please email us at paranormal.insight.podcast@gmail.com. That's paranormal.insight.podcast@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook and Instagram under paranormal.insight.podcast